Hi, I'm Issie Barratt. I'm the Artistic Director of the National Youth Jazz Collective. Welcome to our hashtag Wednesdays, National Youth Jazz Wednesdays. And as you know, it's for those of you that watched us before, it's an opportunity for us to talk to creative artists in the jazz scene or the creative music scene, different types of improvisation, and to see what they're really into, what sort of things really inspire them, what projects they're engaged in, and what their activity is in music education, not necessarily just jazz, but any type of creative music. So many of you may not know that we actually run a scheme called the Ambassadors scheme, and it's a year-long programme where we work with young graduates who are really interested in becoming the next generation of creative music leaders, workshop leaders. And we're focusing this year on working with youngsters from the Midlands, graduates particularly from the University of Birmingham and the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. And we had the great day of interviews and meeting everybody because we weren't in lockdown at that point, and we had a lovely time. I think we even had one day where we all met at the beginning of the scheme, working together online, and then suddenly the online stepped in and swept us away with COVID. So we haven't spoken about COVID on any of these sessions, but obviously this one, it's an obvious contributing factor to the way we've been working. So today we are going to mention the impact of COVID and us being in lockdown. And I'm glad and really thrilled to say that defiantly, it hasn't stopped us. And it'll be really interesting to hear from all the young people that we've been working with, how it's impacted on the learning and the teaching, and maybe it's helped, and also if it's inspired them in any way, etc., etc. So without further ado, I think it'd be really wonderful to interview all the young people that we've been working with, and I'm going to introduce them by their first name, and then they're going to take over, introduce their names fully, say who they are, give you a little bit of a snapshot into them. But their backgrounds and what they're inspired by and their projects, we'll gradually talk more about that as we go along. So without further ado, I'd like to first of all introduce you to Martha.
Hello, my name's Martha. I'm a pianist and singer, and I've just recently graduated from the University of Birmingham where I studied music.
And then Michael.
Hi, I'm Michael Anning. I play the alto saxophone, and I'm currently studying at Birmingham Conservatoire. I'm in my third year.
And you were an alumni, an
Yeah.
alumnus.
Yes, I worked at the summer school last year helping Izzy and Nick.
And I think you've done quite a lot of regional work with us and summer schools as a participant as well. So we'll hear all about that later on. That's brilliant. And then Alex. Hello, lovey. Nice to see you.
Yeah, I'm Alex Clark. I play saxophone. I studied for a year at Birmingham Conservatoire and then left, and I now work at Warwick School. And I'm also an alumni of National Youth Jazz Collective.
Brilliant. And then James. Nice to see you, James.
Hello, I'm James Romain, and I play alto saxophone, and I graduated from the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire last year, and I'm living there at the moment.
And then we've got Daisy. Hello, Daisy.
Hi, I'm Daisy Holder. I'm a jazz singer, and I've just graduated from the University of Birmingham.
And then Piera.
Hi, my name's Piera. I graduated from Birmingham Conservatoire in 2015, and I'm a pianist.
So what I thought it would be really lovely to do to begin with is to share a bit of a background in a sort of snapshot of where you were musically and what sort of things you were discovering and inspired by, who you might have been working with during the same age range of the young musicians that we work with. So recently we were talking about sort of 14 to 18 because of focusing on the summer school age range, but actually the youngest that we've ever worked with is 8. So wondering during that sort of period of 8 to 18, if you could sort of evoke sort of in our mind's eye a bit of a story of what you were listening to and what you were studying and who you were studying with and how you were studying it as well, because different musics are studied in different ways. So might we start first of all with Piera?
Yeah, so I actually think I started the piano when I was 8 or maybe 7, around that age. So I didn't have a great deal of exposure to jazz until I kind of got into my late teens, really. Didn't do any junior academy or anything like that. It was purely just realizing that I wanted to go beyond the kind of the graded stuff that I was getting given and the usual kind of route and find something find a slightly different path. So I think my teacher recommended that I listen to, I think it was Bill Evans actually. He was definitely one of the earlier, maybe when I was about 15, I think. And I suddenly was like, jazz, where has jazz been my whole life? So I that took me down a kind of a bit of a rabbit hole. Herbie Hancock, Garrett, the usual kind of the classics. And I knew I wanted to study music kind of around that age, but I didn't know like in what capacity, and that sort of led me onto that path really, and just lots and lots of listening, and then kind of got to maybe 16, about that age, and I was in sixth form and started to meet some jazz people, you know, people that were interested in jazz as well, did a bit of playing, and that was it really. So quite late, I guess, compared to a lot of people.
And how typical do you think that is from your peer group when you were at college, sort of meeting everybody? Do you think there was a sort of a bit of a spread, that some people were sort of coming to it later like yourself, others had grown up listening to it at home, and some, or how did you feel as a student, you know, in relation to all of that?
Yeah, I think there was a bit of a spread, but there was definitely, I think when I got to Conservatoire, there was a noticeable, there was like, you know, the people that had been doing the junior conservatoire, and then there were the rest of us. So, but I think the kind of, the levels start to balance out just because you're so kind of like imbibed with the whole, with jazz on the course, that I think over time it does sort of start to balance out, and you just, you know, try and catch up. But there were people that I looked at and I went, wow, they know a lot more than me, and I had to really kind of push to keep up.
So James, what was your story, and then how did you feel when you know, having got as far as you did at 18, how did it feel then to go and study at a conservatoire and meet others your age? Was that new to you? Had you got many peers that were playing that music with you before 18?
Yeah, well, before I got to the stage of auditioning, I was in my only real kind of jazz experience was playing in like an area jazz orchestra called Sligo, and it was led by a saxophone player called Matt Lond, and I remember playing really exciting arrangements of, you know, Duke Ellington and the piano player from London, Jules Holland, that's the one, Jules Holland, and that sort of stuff. And and then gradually meeting more and more people that were also into playing that music and had the idea of going to conservatoire, which I wasn't really aware of. So then, that's when I got to the stage of applying, and, you know, much like Pierre, it was kind of, once I got there, it was quite daunting, and seeing many people that had, you know, been through things like NYJC and things like that already had their eyes wide open to this jazz world. That was quite scary, but, you know, you catch up eventually. But
and because also Alex, when you're there for the year, you'd been with NYJC already. I think you went straight more or less from the summer school to the conservatoire, and I'm sure you ran into quite a few people that you'd seen on the summer school, but there would be a bigger pool of people that you were meeting. And was that unusual for you to meet at conservatoire other youngsters that were playing to your level and as passionate and as, you know, fascinated by it, or had you grown up around that?
Well, I sort of grew up around playing with lots of local bands, with mainly older musicians, and I hadn't really done any junior conservatoire, I hadn't done any regional ensembles. So to do NYJC and turn up, and quite a lot of people had done those things and already sort of formed friendships and connections. For me to then come in there, it was quite daunting, but I mean, it was great to meet other people my age, because, you know, from what I'd learned previously, it had all been older people just from my local scene and that. So actually to meet people my age and play was great.
And what did you been? How had you got into the music in the first place? Because when you came to work with us, you were already playing to a very high level, so there was clearly a lot of study and listening and just absorbing the art form. How had that happened?
I remember becoming interested in jazz, mainly because of my school jazz ensemble. They had a really good big band and I wanted to be in it. And I already played flute, so I started the saxophone so that I could go in the ensemble. And then around the same time, I went to go and see Chris Barber. And remember, that was sort of my first proper exposure to hearing live jazz. And I remember just really enjoying it. And it all kind of mushroomed from there, going down and seeing local gigs and then gradually asking to sit in with bands,
Wow.
gradually then getting booked to play with those bands. And that's kind of how my musical education, if you can call it that, evolved, rather than the traditional turning up every week to an institution.
So it was quite old school you were learning on the bandstand, which is kind of what was happening in the last, century. As we were all teenagers, that was mainly how we did, because there were no jazz courses or programs to go to. So it's great to hear that that's still a really effective way of learning, and the bandstand with different people of different ages, that you've all got that same interest. Michael, what was your story? Because we met quite early on. You came to do some of the regional work and then you did the summer school and so on. So I feel that we've sort of seen quite a lot of your story, but only whenever we're together at NYJC. So I've never really had the chance to ask you about what was going on back at school or the music services, what were you listening to at home?
Yeah, so it's all kind of started from my dad putting on some records, the kind of classic story, and then you pick up what he's listening to, and then I was working on classical saxophone stuff at the time, and then he kind of put that on, and that kind of got my interest into that. And then, similar to other people, there was jazz bands at school, kind of county wind bands and then county jazz bands, and then kind of got more used to it through that. And then I auditioned for the summer school, and I think the year I auditioned, you weren't doing the short course. So I think you pointed me towards the London King's Place sessions. So that's where I basically started my journey of NYJC from there. How many? I think it was 3 or 4 years with the Sunday King's Place sessions, and then 4 or 5 summer schools. So yeah, I've been quite glued to NYJC with all their stuff, and it's been a good journey.
And it literally was a journey, because you were travelling, like many people that we've discovered coming to King's Place, we're often travelling over 60 miles. I think 60% of the youngsters who were working with us at the time when you were with us were travelling great distances from Leeds and from down from Devon and Cornwall, and it's incredible. And you were coming over from Norwich.
Yeah, it was about a 2-hour journey to London from there. So yeah, it was a bit of a travel.
And then we had the great pleasure of meeting Ben Curry at University of Birmingham, and through him realised that there was a really strong activity, lots of jazz activity going on. There was a module that people were doing, and there was a society and lots of activities. So that's where we had the initial introduction, and really thrilled to have met both Daisy and Martha, and from that got to know your stories, and they're very different, and which is great. It's one of the great things I love about, we're all very different. I love that difference. And I wondered, first of all, Martha, if you might tell us a bit about what you were doing at this sort of age up until 18, and then also your involvement in sort of outside of jazz, but still doing that improvisation.
Yeah. Again, I didn't have a sort of traditional route into jazz. It was very much sort of background listening to records my dad would put on. I play a lot by ear, and that's sort of how I started to teach myself non-classical piano. I would listen to something, try and pick it up. From that, my music teacher very keenly watched me and said, I would like you to join the school's big band. And I politely declined and said, not this year. She said, no, I think you'll join. So that's how I got into jazz, with some slight persuasion. From that, we did a lot of big band stuff, and then I slowly started to branch out and realize there were different types of jazz. And I got to uni and I auditioned for a big band and was placed in a very short-lived big band in first year. And when I got to uni, loads of different opportunities came up, which has kind of informed my jazz learning, but not being within the genre. So another one of my friends noticed I could sort of play by ear and could sort of pick things up quite quickly, and said, would you be interested in doing improvisation for a comedy troupe? And I said, yes, absolutely, that would be so cool. From that, I got placed in the Watch This improv troupe, and we went up to the Edinburgh Fringe last year. We got shortlisted for Best Improv. So that's, and from that, I just tried to incorporate jazz idioms into what I was doing, and it kind of consolidated both what I was doing comedy-wise and within the wider genre. And then this year, Daisy, who's also on the call, asked me if I would like to be a part of her all-female jazz band, and so we play together. Well, we did pre-COVID, but that's sort of my jazz experience.
That's great. That's a lovely segue to now to talk to Daisy about what were you doing at this sort of age group, and then also, you know, what did you then go on to do? Because I know you were very proactive at the University of Birmingham as well.
Yeah, well, I started music as a whole. When I was young, I first started playing guitar. Just some guy used to come around our house and teach my brother, and I said, oh, I really want to learn how to do that too. And then he moved away, and I just didn't play music, pick up the guitar for ages after that. And I started playing the flute when I was in year 3. I don't know how old that is, probably 8 or something, and continued that until the end. But I didn't really love it. I've never really loved playing the flute. It's not very me, but I've always loved singing. But I didn't have singing lessons until probably 14. And I was just interested in musical theatre, really, and the classic Rodgers and Hammerstein stuff is where I started. I was obsessed with The Sound of Music and used to perform as Maria in the school talent shows, things like that. But yeah, basically that was kind of my early introduction to music. And then a friend said to me, oh, you should listen to Frank Sinatra. And I was like, oh, okay. And then I just discovered this whole world of jazz music, and I thought it was incredible, and I thought it was just so cool. So from there I just was obsessed with Ella Fitzgerald, to be honest. I mean, you can't really not mention her, she's just incredible. So I became really interested in her, which also kind of links with the musical theatre stuff, because she did a lot of kind of the Great American Songbook is closely linked. So yeah, basically from there, somebody then said to me, you should start singing for the school jazz band, because we've got an opportunity to play at the Cheltenham Jazz Festival, which is where I live. And I went to an all-girls school, so the jazz band was made up of several flutes and one saxophone, one cornet, that sort of job, a couple of clarinets. And yeah, so I played the flute and sang for that, and went to the Cheltenham Jazz Festival, which was pretty fun. And then I moved school for sixth form, and the jazz scene there was incredible. Their jazz band is brilliant. And basically got into the jazz band there. And I also joined the county jazz orchestra, who I'd seen perform at the Cheltenham Jazz Festival, and went, ooh, I really want to be part of that. And they weren't taking singers, so I convinced them to let me join after an audition. And yeah, we ended up doing some great gigs with them. We played in the Royal Albert Hall for the youth proms, which was amazing. I got to sing solo there at such a young age. I don't think I'll ever get back up to that level, to be honest. But then I went to uni, and I was still kind of exploring different genres. Even though I love jazz, to be honest, I was never really told much about how conservatoires, and that was a kind of legit path to follow. Like in my school, that was just not something that people did. So, I mean, there's probably one person I know that went to conservatoire from my school. So I went down the uni path and applied to Oxbridge and all of that sort of thing, and ended up in Birmingham, which I'm so happy about. And I have a great singing teacher, Sarah Coleman. And since I've been at the uni, I've literally just completely gone jazz crazy. I was in the jazz orchestra run by Jonathan Silk, which is just incredible. It's quite like modern stuff. It's very forward-thinking jazz, really fun. And then I also became the manager of the Jazz Collective, which really helped me become so involved with the jazz scene there. So that was involving like managing gigs and setting up different jazz opportunities for people at the uni, including workshops with musicians in Birmingham. So that was really fun.
You're talking about a lot of the opportunities that you originally reached out for. There was a bit of resistance from others that, oh, we don't really have singers in this band or whatever. Would you think you would have been so proactive, with setting things up at the university if all those doors had just opened and said, yeah, come on in, we've got lots of opportunities for singers? Do you think you would naturally have still done that, or was it part of the problem solving for you to make sure that you did get access to things?
Yeah, I mean, at the uni, they were taking, like, Silky, he does audition singers, but the repertoire that the band does isn't very...
I was thinking more about what you'd experienced before that, when you were saying, like, the local sort of county band and stuff was saying, would rather you play flute than voice. So
yeah, well, they say, you could only sing if you played the flute, sort of thing. So that's what I did. But what I really loved doing was singing, and they knew that. And I think they saw that kind of enthusiasm from me, and that's what helped it make it so good and enjoyable.
So we've had some really nice insights from Daisy about how influential Ella Fitzgerald was. Piera was mentioning about Herbie Hancock and how she was really ensconced and had quite an intense relationship there. I'm wondering if we could go around everybody else very quickly, if you could like nominate a couple of people, and it could be from any genre, around about that age, what you were listening to before you left home and went to study music. Sort of who were you obsessively listening to and emulating, so that you could start, maybe we could even start to hear them in your playing. So Alex.
I was, I still am obsessively listening to Phil Woods right from the start, really. I was listening to a lot of New Orleans music because that's mainly what the clubs were playing around locally to me. So I was sort of listening to your Louis Armstrong, Hot 5, Hot 7, all that kind of thing. But then someone recommended I should check out Phil Woods, and immediately I was just blown away by his playing. And I'd say he's probably the person I still transcribe the most, just because his career spans such a broad sort of musical taste. You can really hear how his playing evolves throughout his career. So his early stuff is it's really old school, really. And then as you get towards the later things, he definitely heads more into the contemporary. And I like everything from all eras of his playing. And yeah, there's a lot to be learnt from it.
Great sound as well. The minute you hear two notes, it's Phil Woods.
It's kind of sad because he developed emphysema at the end of his career, and you can immediately recognise his sort of later records just because his sound's not got the same body that it used to, which is, a real shame.
James.
Yeah, well, before moving to Birmingham, I mainly tried to emulate kind of Paul Desmond and
lovely,
and Kenny Garrett. Yeah, exactly, lovely. He's very, very lovely,
sweet
sound. Yeah, that was before I really learned to use my full diaphragm and let it all go. Yeah, mostly those two really before college, and then in terms of listening, really varied. I mean, I remember going around to my nan and granddad's house, and she had a load of trad jazz CDs with Ellington Basie, Benny Carter, and some people from the London scene years ago, like Kenny Ball and things like that. So I was really open to that sort of stuff, and I feel like that's influenced me over time. Yeah, definitely.
And when you were talking about people like Kenny Ball, and implying that they're London musicians, but they were very busy touring, and Birmingham would have hosted lots of performances by, all of those musicians. So did your grandparents ever hear him play live?
Yes, they did. I think they even had him at their wedding. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah, I think that was either that or someone that he knew. He got along to play. And Yeah, so there's quite a close connection, I
And
guess.
the son is still flying the flag. You know, there's still a lot of the Kenny Ball pad is still being played, and musicians are still
Right.
together to play it. So that's great.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, Martha, what were your family listening to, and what were you listening to? Sort of headlines of who was your biggest inspiration.
Like I said, I didn't really have that much of an introduction into jazz other than background listening, but
anybody.
I grew up listening to a lot of rock, progressive rock, popular music of the 70s, 60s, and that was still, and psychedelic stuff, and that's still my.
Who could you give us some examples?
Well, I'm sort of a diehard Kate Bush and David Bowie fan.
Choices. Good choices.
And I really like the psychedelic scene as well, and bands like Love, and sort of Jess and Airplane and stuff like that. And so then when listening to sort of really getting into Bowie, and he had the sort of the Berlin Trilogy, and it's very, very experimental, very jazz heavy, and I really quite enjoyed that. And I remember that I used to live in South London. I recently moved to Shropshire, but we went to a concert, a gig at I don't know if you've been, the Hideaway in Streatham, and we saw Jeanette Mason play.
Right.
Yeah, and I thought, wow, and she did loads of covers from her album Deranged, and she did Ashes to Ashes, David Bowie version, and it kind of hooked me, and I went up to her and I asked for a lesson with her, and I got a lesson off of Jeanette Mason. And so it's kind of my love of popular music is kind of, and especially because I like progressive rock and stuff like early Genesis and bands like Yes, and it's kind of intricacies in the music, very, because the musicians usually come from a classical background, and that's how I kind of got more into jazz. That's what I listen to.
There are lots of, there's lots of crossover there. There are lots of jazz musicians that have been really heavily influenced by that rock feel and still, use it a lot. I mean, Soft Machine is still going hard. I don't know if you've come across that group. So, yeah, brilliant. Really good to hear. And Michael, what were you listening to at home? You said that your family were listening to jazz. So was it you? Were you inspired by their record collection, or did you have particular people that you heard that you thought that's definitely want to follow that way of playing and that style of making music?
Yeah, I think it might have been a load of Miles Davis, basically. That's kind of what my dad was into at that particular time that I can remember. But more towards the kind of the years before I moved on to conservatoire, it was similar to James. It was Kenny Garrett, lots of him. Tried to emulate his sound and kind of phrasing and stuff like that. He was a big influence. And Ralph Byrne as well, Canadian tenor saxophonist. And more kind of stuff outside of jazz. I listened to quite a lot of minimalist music, like Steve Reich and Philip Glass, kind of Glassworks and the counterpoint stuff. I listen to a lot of that. I'm
starting to, every time each of you talk about an influence, I start to hear sort of sonically a reference to them and thinking, I want us all to get our instruments out now and sort of play using that little influence, that little stimulus that we've just heard. So, but we can't because we're on Zoom. If we were in the room together, we would. And I think that's the weird thing about the relationship, because we've actually only all met once. And then after that, we were online. I'm just going to get rid of these emails that keep coming in. And then we went online. But I have to say, it does feel like we've had this really close working relationship. And one of the things that's been great is because of the fact that we've been doing a lot of the online teaching for the regions, usually it would have been very difficult for us to use that as sort of teaching practice, because we would have had to pay for everybody to travel around. But because that was also online, we've had this great opportunity to marry each of you up with a group and watch some of the teaching that's taking place. So just so that those of you that are watching, the way the sort of the NYJC pedagogy and the way we do things is that we always give people good notice, about a month's notice before we get together to play. We send out links so that the youngsters really listen to that music for a whole month and absorb it. And we give guidelines about what to focus on in that listening and to learn, and then to bring that to the next session, so that we've got all of that music already inside us, and then we take it further forward. So we don't teach anything note by note. The youngster will have done a large percentage of that on their own, and obviously that means that we've had to think very carefully about the repertoire, because we make sure that it matches where they are, their skill set is. And then you guys were each married up to one of those groups and observed a couple of the sessions. So I'm wondering what was it that you discovered, and could you see sort of remnants of yourself at that age and your fascination, or did you feel that there's a different trend, a different relationship with creative music making? Wondering, Alex, maybe first to start with you. Oh, did you go? You didn't actually observe the sessions, did you? No, brilliant. That's right. Because do you want to maybe explain to everybody why you suddenly were swept away and couldn't stay with us?
Okay, so as I said before, I work at Warwick School as their music assistant. So since last September, I've been sort of helping rehearsals and writing arrangements, all that sort of thing. And then when COVID hit, I was furloughed. And then sort of a while into, I say it was probably about May sort of time, they unfurloughed me and brought me back into school as a classroom teacher, which was a completely different role, completely unmusic related. But I was helping the key worker kids do their online lessons and sort of in charge of a classroom of children. So yeah, unfortunately, I wasn't able to attend the sessions because I was back in work.
But we've had some nice sessions before that where we were just working as a group on stuff as well, and I really enjoyed having you with us. And because you've done NYJC, it kind of feel that a lot of what everybody else was watching, you were already a little bit ahead of the game, because you'd actually done that, the summer schools and stuff. So we could marry all that together now. And what we're looking to do is start to involve the young people that we're talking to here as the next generation of teachers. So with that in mind, I'm wondering if you were asked when you first started out, because some of you have had some involvement in teaching and then came to work with NYJC, and I'm wondering, having then observed the sessions as well, how it's sort of influenced your teaching and what sort of observations you've made. So Daisy, maybe if we could start with you.
Yeah, so I have done more sort of one-to-one teaching before coming into this sort of thing, and obviously at uni I was in charge of the jazz collective workshops, so I also got to see those sorts of workshops. So coming into it, I wasn't hugely experienced in running a jazz workshop myself, so it's been really interesting to see all of the tips and stuff that the tutors have that have shared with us, and watching how other tutors approach teaching their pupils, especially teaching the different instruments as well, and incorporating all of those into one workshop. That's been really interesting. But so also I don't always teach jazz stuff. A lot of the time my pupils want to learn a musical theatre, like Disney sort of stuff, or pop music. And so it's been really good seeing how to approach a jazz pedagogy, and how to prioritize jazz skills in a workshop and in teaching, and improving certain skills that are so necessary to become a good jazz musician, and like oral skills, and recognizing and having a deeper understanding of things like modes and all of that, and different like grooves, and that's being aware of like the whole band. That's really important, and that's something that I've learned how to incorporate into a workshop scenario.
And what's really nice is all of that can be applied to the repertoire. So if you were working with a small group, and one of the youngsters was really into Walt Disney tunes, well, that's not many steps away from the early standards that we were all learning with that sort of harmonic movement. And it's great that you can bring that alive so quickly, and then that they've got given some autonomy as well, that there's some decision making that they can be involved in during the playing as well. James, I know that you've been doing some teaching in schools. I can remember you saying that. And I'm wondering, first of all, did it carry on online afterwards? And how, if at all, has this kind of influenced the work we've been doing, influenced the way that you now think as an educator?
Well, yeah, I did a little bit of kind of group work in schools. But yeah, not much experience with that. But with yeah, certainly individual teaching, one-to-one, picking that up over the last year, really. And I've really enjoyed that. And then just, by witnessing Chris Montague, the guitarist, lead his group of young musicians, it's quite inspiring, to see such young people want to play the music that inspired us, which is, it kind of surprises me sometimes, because you listen to the radio and hear all this kind of new pop music, and you're like, how can anyone want to learn jazz now? But they do, which is good. And yeah, just being really inspired by the level that they're at, and that just makes me want to learn ways in which to pass on my knowledge and develop their skills with that. Yeah, that's
great. It sounds really like you're on a journey now, and I'm really excited about hearing sort of on an annual basis how that journey's going, because I think there are going to be lots of young musicians that are going to really benefit, and so the way they engage with music might be quite different to how they might have done had you not sort of done this program and thought about things in the way that you have. I remember you being quite passionate about the individuals that you teach, sort of really, you care a lot about getting to know them and what they're into musically, and then shaping things. And I think that's another thing that's really important to the way that we've all been teaching, is to make it so that it's bespoke. And that's another nice thing about being improvising musicians, from all genres, that we're not frightened to think on our feet and to move quite quickly and react, and to be reactive. So it's lovely. It was lovely from all of you in different times, you've talked about how that has also appeared in your teaching, which is great. And it's really important, if you're watching and you're an educator, that is really important to the music. It's really important to make sure that the youngsters feel relaxed, that they're not being judged at all, but actually that they can even forget that they're in a group, but they can lose themselves in the music and they feel very relaxed. You can't play improvised music, and you definitely can't develop your improvised music if you're feeling stressed out. And I know a lot of the professionals that I work with, we work very hard to make sure at that level that we stay relaxed as well. So it's really fundamental. And then that is sort of always being equal as well. So not having a sense of I'm the teacher and you're the student, because nowhere when we make that music does that hierarchy really exist. So it's really great to bring that into the teaching as well. Michael, what's your, you sort of were ahead of the game slightly with the knowing the inside story of NYJC. How was it then trying to put it into practice?
Yes, being taught by NYJC for a number of years, it was great to kind of see how the kind of NYJC way had continued through the sessions I observed. There was a lot of stuff that when I was being taught when I was younger, it was still kind of being carried on by Sam, who I was observing. And it was just great to see the interaction between, even over Zoom, as hard as it can be, between the youngsters, and how we kind of kept them engaged. And in certain circumstances, he kind of, mostly because it's quite hard to do, obviously, group playing, he would try and incorporate circumstances where you would usually play, but try and put it over Zoom, so kind of rhythmic work over kind of Latin stuff. It was great to see the kids kind of clap along with certain rhythms and that kind of stuff, and he would comp beneath solos and they would kind of play over it. So it was great to see how he would kind of continue the normal stuff but over Zoom.
And I think with that in mind, one of the only difference we made was we found we couldn't do, normally we would do a whole day workshop, and that was just impossible. So we ended up doing sort of 2 hours instead of a whole day. And then also the group sizes, often it's up to 12 or 15, not so often 15, 12 is kind of the maximum. But that on Zoom can feel quite, and Teams, that can feel quite too many people. So we split the groups in half often, and I think that worked nicely, and then bringing them all together. So, but like you say, the actual pedagogy, so the methods, the repertoire, the way that we went about it, it was really interesting, that the challenge of, you know, not being in the room anymore. So how do we retain that group sort of vibe and thinking together, being interactive, being very sort of flighty, sleight of hand, being able to react to stuff very quickly. How do we keep that going when we're trapped in these little boxes and we've got latency? So I think it was great. One of the things I felt proudest about working with the team is that skill that jazz musicians have of being able to think in the moment very quickly. That was really serving everybody well in their teaching online. That kept going. So Martha, when you were watching the teaching side of things, did you, because it's been really interesting talking to you about the sort of the sort of the breadth of where we can actually take improvised music, you know, with talking about what you were talking about earlier on with the improvisation and comedy and going up to the Edinburgh Festival and things like that. You know, that really sort of opened the canvas even wider for all the young musicians to think about, oh, those are the contexts that we can work in. So I'm thinking now, keeping that context, how do you feel you would work with some of those young musicians around the type of music and the approach that you've got? Did it sort of help you think about ways that you could engage with them? Or did you feel it was quite genre specific and that you'd have to sort of fight your way in with the way that you were approaching music making?
Are you talking about me before joining the jazz course and then afterwards, or
sort of now as you reflect about sort of your teaching? Could you see how, if I was to suddenly say, oh, Sam's ill and we need a dep to cover for him, I would love to be able to say to you, come and work with the youngsters and work on the approach that you've got about you know, being influenced by different stimuli. And I'm wondering if you feel that would work within the context of the way that we run things.
I think I understand your question. I don't see why not. Yes, I don't. What NYJC has been really good for and sort of informing my own teaching, which I think is kind of universally applicable, is this incremental building, which I've then gone, in the very few job interviews I've had since graduating, managed to drop in. They've all been sort of education ones. There's, I think the importance of building incrementally and stuff like that. And the more I think about it, the more I realise how diverse that is, how applicable it is to not only jazz, but like I said, the improv stuff I do, because I mentored a wonderful pianist all of last year, sort of how to pick up on tropes, very basic things you already know how to do and how to sort of incorporate them into different situations. So I think, yeah, National Youth Jazz Collective's philosophy and pedagogy is very transferable, and I don't think it needs to be limited to just jazz. It's certainly.
Well, I'm really pleased to hear that, because I really celebrate everyone's differences and all the different things that people bring in, and I want to be able to open the door to say, bring it in, share it with everybody. So, you know, but sometimes, especially in the jazz scene, you can feel that everybody's sort of boxing the music in a bit. So that's nice to hear that you don't feel that, because I'm really thrilled to say, I'm sure that you read it in the email, but because of the summer school, we're actually bringing Michael Price in, who's a TV composer. He wrote the music for Unforgotten and the latest BBC Dracula series that's been on, and Sherlock as well. So, and he's going to bring in some videos to work, video footage. So he's going to be working with each of the groups and focusing solely on that sort of, so how in 1 hour and 20 minutes are we going to write music for this 3 minutes and record it as 3 minutes of film. And then the nice thing is, I think it's nice, is that we can't actually use the footage, we can't share it publicly. So then I'd like the youngsters to say, right, we've written the music, so now let's make a video that goes with the music that we wrote for the video, so that then they can actually sort of have, everything will be their own, but it will have been stimulated by, you know, this original kernel of an idea that he brings in. And it gives them an insight on, an authentic insight into how to write for TV. Because a lot of the jazz musicians we work with are regular session musicians for television and film. And so it's really nice to open that up. So wondering, sort of looking sort of further forward, we're really keen to work with all of you after either online, doing things online, and you be taking on more leadership roles online, or working more in the Midlands once we're allowed to come out and play, and again having you as lead tutors with different projects. And I'm wondering, sort of as we look at that, how you feel about moving things forward with this current generation, and relating it. We've had that conversation with two people that are education managers from hubs, and I'm wondering how you feel about now trying to contextualise what we do in terms of sort of the key stage side of things and the grades. I know that some of the colleagues that we have sometimes shy away from trying to frame the work we do, defining it according to key stages and associated board grades. But as the sort of artistic director of NYJC, it's something that comes up time and time again when I'm talking to prospective partnerships. They want to know how they can translate our work into key stage, and what sort of grades do you feel you have to have. And I'm wondering now, as you've seen the year, how you feel about your own teaching and sort of working locally and talking to music services and schools, and is it something that you feel that you'd like to do, or do you feel more like some of our tutors, which is, well, they can do that at school, and when let's give them a different environment, a different framework. Because we had, just to contextualize it for everybody that everyone's watching, we had two people one was from Rotherham and one was from Telford Music Service, and they came and worked with us for a whole afternoon, talking and focusing on key stage and what that all means, and then what sort of skill set you'd expect the young musicians to be working on. So it was that for all of our work that we're doing was quite new. I knew it happened, and I know people that do it, but sort of within the jazz fraternity, it's not something that is talked about very often, and associated board grades aren't when we talk about what level do you have to play at. So I'm wondering now, having had those conversations, if that's something that you feel like, no, I think I could embrace that and I could do this improvised music, contextualizing it in that framework, or do you feel that it's quite removed and the two can't be side by side? Piera.
I think from having that conversation about education, it was the thing that was quite eye-opening for me was talking about relating improvisation from an early age into like whole class instrumental teaching, and it was really interesting just to hear of all the kind of like different ways that we can that can be like implemented from like year 2, year 3, whatever. So I think having the key stages and having these like benchmarks, it more and more I think is really important. But from my own personal teaching experience, I think what I've come to realise, like when they get older, I think everyone learns in such vastly different ways that I tend to like tailor how I teach them according to how I think they will best learn. So I think it's like having those foundational kind of benchmarks is really important in so many different ways, but you've also got to have this understanding of how the individual works and how they're best going to get to the next step, because so many people could struggle to read music but could be excellent improvisers and just naturally pick it up by ear, or the other way around. There's so many different ways of teaching, I think.
And that, you've just inspired me to say, with that in mind, that there are a lot of people that watch that are teachers as well as young musicians, and I'm sure there are teachers out there that have got questions they'd like to ask us. So if you would like to put into the comments, I know it says on the post, but you might have missed, if you'd like to put any questions in the comments, they will get passed on to us, because it would be lovely to hear from educators that are watching and young musicians, what your experience is and any questions that you've got. I think you just captured it beautifully in the way that you said, Piero, about people learning different ways, because I think people engage with music in different ways, and it's lovely to have that opportunity for it to be tailored. And I think that's such a fundamental part of our music, the way we make our music, because no two performances sound the same. We're constantly, all of us are constantly tailoring. I would argue that we're all teaching each other all the time, and we're all, everything we do is bespoke and tailored. And so to teach it in that way is really true and authentic to the music.
Absolutely, yeah. Couldn't put it better myself. I think it's.
Oh, I think I stole your ideas anyway. You already said it. Beautifully put. And James, do you feel the same sort of I know you were very interested in, because I think you had already had some awareness at the schools of this key stage, this world of key stageness existing. So how do you feel now about going into the school? And Alex as well, it would be interesting how you feel about taking it into the schools and contextualizing it now in the key stage world. Is it something you would do, James?
Yeah, completely. I mean, from my own experience coming up through working through GCSEs and A-levels, the idea of learning music was very, very theory heavy and very academic, which is fine, but some people really don't connect with that. And I found, towards the end of school that I just started to lose interest in music in a way because of that. And having that, chance to go to maybe an after school session and just play whatever, do whatever you want, have that freedom to approach music in a completely different way, would be really, really important for young people's development. And it's not necessarily something I experienced at that stage. So definitely I would take that in myself if I had the chance to go in and to work with young people. Definitely have that kind of open-minded approach to learning music, and make sure that everyone is involved and comfortable with approaching improvisation.
Alex, with the work that you're doing in Warwick, following on from James, does the key stage grid kind of feature in the management of your actual programme and activity?
I mean, the curriculum itself, sort of academically speaking, does really frustrate me, to be honest, because it seems to be that the only way you can succeed and get sort of GCSE and A-level music is if you're proficient at reading music, which for me is odd coming from jazz, where I know loads of really, really exceptional jazz musicians who can't read a single dot. Mm-hmm. And I don't know, I just feel like in music education, quite often this thing of theory versus performance, the two things are really sort of compartmentalized, and in fact they should be integrated. And the fact that at A level, for example, you'll have to do a performance and then you'll have to do a written paper, but there's no sort of overlap between the two. It's like you work on your instrument and then you work at the page. And I just think that as a whole, music should be more about the bigger picture, and there should be a pathway through music education if you can't read music and if you're interested in music other than Western classical music, because to me that seems to be what the emphasis of the curriculum is.
That reminds me of a great comment that Nick Smart made, who's head of jazz at the Royal Academy of Music, when he came and did some of the regional work with us, and we were doing a lot of professional development, CPD, which we do, go and work with different music hubs and schools. He, at the end of the day, everybody that was engaged in what we were doing was quite taken aback with what they'd achieved, and that's that incrementalness that you were talking about, Martha. Everything we do, it's really important. And I think a lot of the tutors felt more comfortable, the teachers. It was the first time they'd looked at improvisation, but they felt very comfortable about maybe taking some of those little ideas and using it with their students. And Nick put it very nicely. He said, but actually what we're talking about isn't jazz, it's musicianship. And I think there's a big gulf, isn't there? There's a big gap often in that music provision. So we're all sitting there, like I always feel that we're squirreling away, playing lots of notes written down on a piece of paper. But then our actual musicianship connection with what that page is actually trying to tell us musically is often missing. And that's one of the things that I love about working in the jazz side of things, is that, we can dig deeper inside it and really get to know what the nuts and bolts are, and how do you put all of this together and how does it work? Which leads me on to one last thing that I'd like to talk about. I'd like to be a little bit provocative and say, there have been times when people have made comments on, you know, that diatonic music is dead, music of the 7 notes in a scale, and yet so much jazz and pop not only uses it but depends on it. You know, it's the DNA of what how the music is made. So I'm just wondering about sort of your individual relationships with sort of diatonic music that uses 7 notes, so lots of scale music, and if you feel that there's a big rebellion of the students who say, no, I want it to be more atonal, I don't like these 7 notes. So how about Martha? Is diatonic music alive and kicking, or?
I think so. I don't see a reason why it has to go. I think it's important to learn everything. Diatonicism, atonalism, atonality even, and then work out what works within the context of what you're teaching and or learning.
Because coming from a university background as well, with the composition is a very large part of what's happening in the department. I should imagine there'd be some fantastically insightful conversations around that sort of the sound world and stuff. And I just wondered how.
Well, I actually wrote a dissertation, but I also majored in composition whilst at uni, and I did notice, and although it was sort of contemporary classical music, there was a slight rejection of excessive diatonicism, but then you couldn't do atonality for its sake. There had to be a purpose to it. So as long as there's a purpose to what you're writing, playing, or teaching, that's fine. But the outright rejection of one based on just a dislike of it is, I don't think, that productive, really.
I think in the free world, I think atonality works so beautifully because it's basically like a big palette of colour, isn't it?
Exactly, yeah.
Just dive into, and I'm always very playful with that in the background of when I write pieces that people are improvising over. There's always something a little bit edgy that's pushing at the diatonism. So Alex, what do you think about in the world that you are teaching at schools as well? What do you think? What's the general relationship of the young musicians that you're working with and sort of diatonic music?
Well, you know what? First of all, I think I should just say that I think the idea of a good tune is totally underrated. Like, I personally love melody, and quite a lot of what frustrates me about jazz education, in fact, is that it's sort of all about how we can push this genre and how we can advance it and how we can develop it. But actually, I just love playing a good tune, and I do think that that's overlooked sometimes in favour of getting bogged down in all the technicalities. But from an education point of view, I think the music curriculum, sort of academically, is quite good in terms of being broad and having a good mix of atonal music and diatonic music. So I think it gets represented. And then from a performance point of view, we try with our big bands, for example, to play a broad spectrum of stuff. So we'll play, early Duke Ellington things, but we'll also do more contemporary, sort of like Gordon Goodwin arrangements and beyond. And generally the kids seem to engage in it all, which is great. I mean, they don't seem to favour one style of music. I get the impression they very much just enjoy all being together and playing the music.
That's something that's come out from a lot of the conversations, is even sort of having genre definitions. We've been accused, as somebody said in passing, it's very old school, and I'm glad of that. I love that genre fluidity that we've all got. And the other thing, just as we sign off, is that I love about diatonic music is it's a framework in which everybody then can tell their own unique individual story. So it's like reading a short story. Everybody's version of that short story is going to be very different, and we need that background of the harmony. So that's what we're hanging our storytelling on. So I think there is an infinite number of ways that we could tell that story. So I reckon that was BT telling me it's time to wrap it up. What I'd like to say for all of you is I think that each of you is a very unique creative person, and I'm really thrilled that you're part of the team. And I'm really excited, whatever platform, whether we be online or whether we be in person, very excited about carrying our relationship on. And for us in a couple of years' time to be working with the next group, next cohort of ambassador tutors, and for us to be passing that information on. That's our catchphrase, and it's a Dave Holland tune, Pass It On. That's NYJC's catchphrase. So if you want to hear more about NYJC and the great work we're doing, well, I would sign up for our newsletter if I were you. So you can go to the www.nationalyouthjazz.co.uk website. It's a fantastically beautiful new website we've got, thanks to Nadia von Massau. And she's now also doing our newsletters, which are going out tomorrow. So if you hurry up now tonight, sign up for the newsletter. It's got some fantastic things that we're doing. The newsletter is going to go out every 2 months. And there will be lots of things that we're doing, both online and in person, which we want to make sure everybody can engage in. So please, everybody that's watching, do rush now to that website and sign up for the newsletter, so that when she presses send tomorrow, your email addresses are in there. And I think you will be in for a major treat. And also, if you'd like to donate, as you can hear from what we're doing, we're really committed not only to the genre, but to the young musicians that would like to play the music. That's the most important thing to us at NYJC. And there are lots of young musicians from backgrounds who could do with some financial support. And we're really committed to making sure that we have a very fair bursary scheme, and that anyone that's interested in the music could take part, and that they're not prohibited by cost. So obviously with that means that we could do with keeping the donations coming in at a very difficult time right now, the COVID. The only time I've plugged COVID as the reason to donate, but since we've talked about it. So we are working really hard, but you can imagine the amount of time it takes to bring things online and work with the young musicians. It's kind of 3 times as costly as when we were doing it in person. So if you'd like to support our work so that we can carry on giving those generous bursaries, again, please go to the website. There's a donate page there. And next week we haven't quite got a guest set up, but we will be talking about the exciting summer school that we're about to embark on. And I will be inviting Nick, our programme manager, to join me to begin with. And then we had a cancellation of our guest, so I shall quickly get on there and invite an inspirational person to come and join us next week. The week after that, we've got members of heads of departments from the conservatoires. So in 2 weeks' time, they'll be talking to people about their own journey as creative people, but also how to audition. So we'll be joined by Nick Smart from the Royal Academy of Music, and also Jeremy Price from the Royal Birmingham Conservatoire. And then we set off and embark on the summer school. And oh boy, what a treat for everybody that's watching, because not only do you get 1 of these a week, you're going to get 6 in a week. So every evening from the 16th to the 21st of August, from 5 o'clock to 6 o'clock, you'll meet a few of the youngsters we've been working with during the day, and a small sample will come and share the excitement of what they've been doing, and then there'll be a guest. So I'm really thrilled that our very first guest on the 16th is going to be Julian Joseph, who's our vice president, and his brother James Joseph, who's on our board of trustees. And then the next day we'll be talking to Michael Price about writing for television. And then we've also got the National Jazz Centres coming to talk to us, London Jazz News, Ribble Valley Jazz Festival, a few more heads of departments from the conservatoires, Royal Welsh, Royal Scottish, Guildhall School of Music and Drama. And then at the very end, on the Friday, we'll be getting everybody to say what a week we've had. So you'll be able to see headlines. Olga Fitzroy as well is coming to work with us, engineer who works with Coldplay. She produced an album I did recently, and she also works at Air Studio. So one of the things about COVID is that sometimes we have actually ended up doing things online that we might not have done in person. And that's something to come and celebrate with us on the 12th of August. So I want to please thank everybody that's joined me today. I want to thank everybody that's been watching. Those of you that are watching on YouTube after we've gone offline, have an enjoyable time and come and join us live next time. Do please send us your questions. And finally, Nick, please come and show yourself, lovely, because we can't talk about Birmingham and the East Midlands and the West Midlands without you.
Absolutely not.
Words about your involvement in Birmingham, what you did, but then we can talk further about it next week.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, just Birmingham. I studied in Birmingham for 4 years, and it was just a lovely place to be. and yeah, just to get things moving there, and yeah, just generally trying to move the scene along, and just a fantastic place to be as a young jazz musician.
Well, I'm really looking forward to hearing more about that next week when we have a chat. And it was our conversation that inspired me to focus our work with the ambassadors this year in Birmingham. So because of the fact that we want to give you more work opportunities and also give the area more of an input from creative music making. So altogether, I think we're going to do a marvellous job, but I'm not going to keep anyone any longer. We've had a fantastic conversation. I really appreciate all of you making the time to come and talk to us, and hope to see many of you on the summer school, because I know hopefully some of you are going to come and be chaperones on that course as well. So from me, everybody, thanks for letting me rabbit away here. It's been lovely. I'm looking forward to seeing all of you in person at some time. It's getting a little bit box-centric, but I'm going to be picking my baritone up soon, and I've got a lot of playing in the next 3 or 4 weeks. So let's see what happens, and do stay well, everybody. See you very soon.
Thanks, Izzy.